The last time you were in a video game store and you were considering a purchase, what did you do? You probably took out your phone and consulted price charting. Well, I've got news for you. That may not have been a great decision. There's a lot of reasons why, and we're going to look at all of them today on It's All Doug in Games. Hey folks, it's Doug from It's All Doug in Games. Today, we are going to talk about disruption. Disruption in the video game collection scene, particularly in the marketplace of buying and selling games. As I stated in the intro, for many years, people have considered price charting to be the gold standard, the unimpeachable truth when it comes down to the age-old question, what's this game worth? Well, folks, I'm here to tell you that while price charting still has some value, it is no longer, in my estimation, the unimpeachable truth, the gold standard in valuing your video games. And there's a number of reasons for that, and I want to talk about them and share this information with you and get your thoughts, obviously. But let's start with these reasons why price charting is no longer the single source of truth. The first reason, and I think the most important of all of the ones we'll talk about today, is simply put, condition. And I don't mean condition as, is it a loose cart? Is it a box cart? Is it a sealed cart? I mean the actual physical condition of the item. This is particularly important when you're talking about complete in box games, where you have to factor in the condition of a cardboard box or jewel case, a manual, usually a paper manual, and a cartridge or disc. There's all sorts of things that could go wrong in terms of condition, from marker writing, video store stickers, scratches, burns, rips, tears. It got run over by your car, you name it. There's a lot to be said for condition, and as collectors in the scene matures year over year, more and more I see people more sensitive to condition in their collections, and that translates to how much they're willing to pay for a game. So this becomes more and more of a disruptor to, again, the price charting methodology. Said methodology, right on their website, is that price charting is using as its sole source of input eBay and also the price charting marketplace. The problem here is that more and more sales are happening off of those two platforms, and the lack of that information is a big concern with the price charting values. But let's get back to condition for a moment, circling back to that. It is important to look at condition, and you can see, just by looking at some of price charting's own data, great illustrations of that. I'm reminded of Donkey Kong Jr. Math. I've got a fun story about that in just a moment, but let's look at this as our first example. On price charting, if you look at Donkey Kong Jr. Math for the NES, it's one of the most desirable games to set collectors. It was printed in very low numbers, a very early Nintendo game. And in this case, when we look at price charting, we see that the last 4 transactions for a complete in-box Donkey Kong Jr. Math date all the way back to August. Now, if we look at the pictures from those transactions, which is pretty cool, price charting lets you, for a nominal fee, look at these pictures. For example, let's look at the $1,680 transaction back last August, and you can see here, wow, the condition of that box is pretty rough. And I think I'm being polite and kind here in terms of how crinkled and kind of just really excessively worn that box is. The manual looks to be in average condition, as is the cart. But again, in terms of the complete in box condition, I would call that poor. Now, by contrast, if we look at the transaction, the only transaction here that was actually more than $2,000, the $2,999 transaction, you can see that the photograph of that game, while it only shows the box, does show a box in much, much nicer condition with some pretty decent corners, no real excessive wear on it. It's, quite frankly, one of the finer examples of a Donkey Kong Jr. Math box I've ever seen. So I can certainly understand why this one went for $1,000 over the price charting average. Now, I said I had a funny anecdote, and the reason why I wanted to bring up Donkey Kong Jr. Math, for those of you who don't know, I am actually a Nintendo complete in box collector. There's some games I'm still looking for, of course, Donkey Kong Jr. Math being one of them. So I was tickled, excited, ecstatic, and delighted almost a rhyme. I was so close on that one. At the Long Island Retro Gaming Show last August, my producer Cassandra Hammerstone poked me on the shoulder and said, "There's a Donkey Kong Jr. math." I got very excited, dropped what I was doing, and scampered on over. However, by the time I got there, my delight became horror when I laid my eyes on this little beauty. That's right. Technically, it's a Donkey Kong Jr. math, but our hopes and dreams were deflated when we realized that the top of the box was completely missing. It looks like an animal had eaten it. And there was a little price sticker at the top that said $2,500. Oh, box and cart, no manual with that. So here was an example of a vendor at a convention, and typically you'll see vendors at conventions, it's convention pricing. They'll take the price charting value and maybe add about 20% on it, which, on its face, isn't that egregious. I mean, you're getting the convenience of getting the game in real time. You can examine it. You can look at the condition, try before you buy, if you will. But in this case, this vendor had absolutely no interest whatsoever in tempering that all-important price charting number with condition. And so you had a case where I would be willing to probably bet that Donkey Kong Jr. math went right back home with that vendor after the show, because I don't know too many complete-in-box collectors that are willing to lay out $2,500 for a game that's not actually complete and partially eaten. I don't know. Suffice it to say, I attempted to offer a polite counteroffer, which was politely declined. So props to the vendor for being a gentleman, but perhaps a little unrealistic in his assessment of the value of this game. You see this all the time, folks, with transactions where people are not factoring in the condition, and it just causes agita for both buyers and sellers. So there you go. Condition is a big problem with price charting. Let's move on to another very big disruptor of price charting. I think it's just as important as condition. It is the emergence of non-eBay platforms with a larger and larger quantity of important transactions recorded on said platforms. Specifically, I'm thinking of things like heritage auctions, which is more and more now getting into ungraded video games. You often see complete in box games. Of course, you see typically sealed and graded games as well. But none of these transactions are actually showing up and being considered by price charting. So that is, again, a lot of important omission. And then Whatnot. Now, Whatnot is an interesting story because Whatnot is a platform that's been around for a few years, but it continues to get bigger and bigger every year in terms of the size of the audience and the number of transactions that are happening on Whatnot. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with Whatnot, think of Whatnot as a streaming service for selling video games. You basically live stream the auctions of your video games. So you turn on the camera. It's like if you were on a YouTube live video or a Twitch video, but instead of going online to simply entertain, you're there to hold up your video games one by one. You can turn them around. You can get it from all angles. You can give a really detailed accounting to your viewers and potential buyers of the condition of your items, and then you hold a live auction for them. Obviously, the highest bid wins. So there's a lot of reasons here why Whatnot is so disruptive to the status quo, to the conventional wisdom of price charting. So there's a few reasons. Let's go through them. Number one, I like to call it the parasocial connection. Who are the biggest streamers on Whatnot? Well, to no coincidence, they happen to be the biggest YouTubers in the space. I'm thinking of people like the Pixel Game Squad, Chase After the Right Price. To be clear, these guys work their butts off and they do a lot of work to source these things that they then turn around and sell on Whatnot. They also have sterling reputations because their reputation is everything. They can't afford to screw someone over on a shady deal on Whatnot. This is a world in 2024. Social media is judge, jury, and executioner on any content creator. None of these guys can afford to screw someone over. So they are held to a very high standard, and they largely do meet that. So if you buy something from one of these creators, it's going to show up well packaged. You're going to get what was described, and what you pay is what you pay. But it's that parasocial connection. See, people love talking to people they consider famous. And in the world we live in, folks, it's 2024. If you're famous on YouTube, that's not really any different from being famous in the 80s and 90s for being on TV, being in a sitcom, being a TV or movie star. YouTube is the new TV and movie stars. So it's very exciting for a video game collector to go on, say, Retro Rick or the Pixel Game Squad or Chase After the Right Price. You get to talk in real time to these people that you see on TV. They talk to you. They cheer you on. They know your name. It's like the bar and chairs. There's an excitement. There's an adrenaline rush combined with the natural endorphin and adrenaline rush at participating in live auction. And for that reason, you see that the prices of games on Whatnot, particularly those sold by, we'll call them celebrity content creators, go way over the price charting average. And that's, again, how I'm tying it back to this conversation. Price charting not only doesn't take into consideration Whatnot auctions, but they especially don't take into consideration that those increasing number of transactions in the marketplace are way outside the averages that price charting is representing. So when you're looking at a price, it's just a price charting price, you're not factoring any of that activity in. So if you're considering a transaction that's not strictly on eBay or the price charting marketplace, and you're using price charting, you may be making a big mistake because you're leaving a lot of information out. And of course, like I said, with condition on Whatnot, that's a big part of it too. Because on eBay, you can look at about 9 different potato cams that Judy the picker from Arkansas got for a game she found at a yard sale. But on Whatnot, you can sit there and request, can you turn the game around? Can you zoom in on this? Can you see this? Can you see that? You're going to get a lot more information than you will on eBay. And I think that is one of the reasons why you're seeing an increasing amount of the higher end and great condition things selling on Whatnot. Because buyers have more confidence that the sellers are legit and they have a better opportunity to see things before they commit to making a bid. So that means that the marketplace, particularly for complete in box games, for higher end things, for things that are tough to find, are very difficult to go by just with the price charting because so many different pieces of information are being left behind. So there's a few takeaways we have to have here. For sellers, you have to take the condition of your items into consideration when you're pricing them. Regardless of whether you're pricing them for eBay, Facebook Marketplace, a convention, your brick and mortar store, or whatnot. You can't be unrealistic about your expectations for your Donkey Kong Jr. math where the top was torn off. For buyers, it's kind of the same thing. You have to understand that you can't just look at that price charting value and expect to find an absolutely flawless gem mint example of your game. Quite frankly, you're probably going to have to pay considerably more than price charting, and you're going to have to be okay with that. You're going to see a lot of in the future in the video game collecting marketplace where there are different classes of collections now, even within loose, complete, and box. It's going to be based on condition, and those things are going to matter. This is something that's happened in the baseball card and comics world over decades. But comparatively speaking, the video game market is still in its infancy. And so as condition becomes more and more a thing, I imagine that the folks in price charting will eventually figure this out in time, how to properly reflect condition. But for the time being, until they do, it's really important that while price charting is a great starting point, stop using it as the final destination. Do your research. Information is power. Be a smart buyer and or a smart seller. Well, folks, thank you so much for watching. I'm really curious to know how you feel about this subject in the comments. How important do you take price charting information? Do you have better ways to value games? Do you think that it should be done differently? And as always, if you like the cut of my jib, please consider liking and subscribing. Well, folks, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on It's All Dug in Games.